I want to take our 4 words again, and I want to give you Bible answers for those words. The impulsive person, well, the Bible answer is self-control. Now, let me also state that we don't want to cliche people or bumper sticker people and just say, you need to exercise self-control. The impulsive person that you're dealing with more than likely has been habitualized in impulsive behavior for a long time. Therefore, you will not be able to just flip the switch like what Jesus said in 5:30 of Matthew, that you amputate it, cut your hand off, pluck your eye out. It won't work because we know that our behaviors are tied to our hearts. And so self-control is the final end result that you're looking for, but there will have to be a lot of heart transformation to get this person to where they can live a self-controlled life, because the behavior that you want, self-control, is tied to a habituated heart that needs to transform, and that will take work on the soul care provider's part. The anxious person, the word is trust. And again, we don't want to bumper sticker people and say something like, trust God. I mean, ultimately, all of our problems boil down to that simple statement, but we don't give simple statements because there's a complexity between where they are and where they need to be. There is a simplicity on the other side of complexity, and the simplicity is trust, but you have to move through the complexity. For example, when it comes to trusting God, what you will have to do is you'll have to identify and eliminate the faith killers. What I mean by faith killers, those things that kill our faith or kill our trust. When you are examining a person who has a hard time trusting the Lord, it is imperative that you identify what are the things that are doing that. Now, there are only 3. There are only 3 reasons or 3 ways that a person will not trust the Lord or cannot trust the Lord at this time. For example, anger. If I am angry at God, I am not going to trust God. It will be helpful at this point to think of Peter standing on the boat in Matthew 14, and Jesus is telling him to trust him, walk on water. Well, if Peter were angry with Jesus, he would not get out of the boat. Anger negates faith. Anger negates trust. And so if you're angry with the Lord, well, then you're not going to trust them. And so rather than just saying that for your problem here of fear is faith, well, rather than bumper stickering them or clicheing them, you want to get inside, let's say, the faith killers, and one of those is anger. Now, let me talk about anger very briefly. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this graphic that you're looking at. I talked about this graphic in my Doctrine of Repentance webinar. That webinar is free and live on our site. I would encourage you to watch that webinar. Actually, it's one of our top 4. It's the top 4 that I recommend for anyone to watch, and you'll see them on all 4 of them on our website. But one of those is the Doctrine of Repentance. The other is Fear of Man. There's another one, How to Overcome Self-Reliance. And then there is a 4th one that's not coming to mind now, but as it does, I'll remind you of it. But one of those is Doctrine of Repentance. Oh, the 4th one was Biblical Decision Making, and I would encourage any believer to watch all 4 of those webinars. That's 4 hours of outstanding training. But in the Doctrine of Repentance webinar, I talk about anger, and the reason that I use this anger spectrum that you see on the screen is because what you heard me say a while ago, that the person is angry with God, and if you say that to a Christian, many of them will say, no, I'm not angry at God, and they have a weak or limited or diminished understanding, interpretation of what anger is. Earlier also I said that disappointment over a long-term period is ultimately anger. Disappointment, discouragement, all of those fit within the anger box or the basket word of anger. And so if you have a person who is struggling with long-term disappointment, I mean, what they're saying is God, I don't like my life. God is sovereign. God is omnipotent. God is omniscient. He is permitting, providentially guiding your life, writing the narrative, the script of your life. And if a person lives in constant ongoing disappointment, well, the word is anger. They're angry with God. But again, sometimes when you say angry or you're angry with God, that's not what you want to say, because they will confront that. They may even rebuke you for saying that, because they have a diminished understanding of what anger is. And so on the anger spectrum here on the right side of the screen are a lot of subtle forms of anger. And if any of these things are long-term conditions of a person's soul, well, it's just another way of saying that they are angry. Obviously, on the left side of the screen it's easy to understand how all of these can fit within the anger construct. But Christians typically, if they commit anger, they're living on the right side of the screen. And again, James in chapter 4, verses 1, 2, and 3, he just called it murder, an even stronger word for the word anger. He substituted the word murder. And so one of the faith killers is anger. Another is afraid, being fearful of God. And at some level, I think all of us are afraid of God. And then the third faith killer is agnostic. The word that I'm thinking about here is ignorant or lack of awareness. There's something about God that we do not believe, or there's something about God that we do not understand. I'm just using A's here to keep it all in a nice rhythm. Anger, afraid, or agnostic. These are the three reasons. And what you will find with a lot of people is that there is a hybrid type of faith here, where anger or fear or ignorance are all working together, but they will inhibit faith. And so when you say that you need to trust God, rather than clichéing them, you want to get inside that trust and help to see what is the complexity on that side of the simplicity. The simplicity is trusting God. And then for depressive, the word we're looking for is hope. Now, the difference between faith and or trust and hope, in some ways, they are synonymous. They mean the same thing. But in this webinar, I'm using trust as I want to trust God practically, moment by moment, day by day, in some very specific ways. I need to trust God. Hope, I'm using a little bit differently. Hope is we have hope in God. That is more looking through the telescope, where I know that this is going to be okay. I have hope that this is going to be okay. And so trust is looking at the microscope, where I'm getting into the details of my daily life. And then hope is looking through the telescope, where I know it's going to be okay. And so I'm using them a little bit differently to explain the difference between what the DSM calls anxiousness or depressive. And then disruptive is obedience. Obedience it could encompass self-control, of course, but obedience also is a broader or different kind of label than self-control. You just want this person to obey in all ways, in everything. And then the self-control, it is a particular kind of behavior that you're looking at. And so this is just a quick way of looking at the Bible's answers to these problems of disorders as we have outlined in this webinar.